Welcome to this episode of the Deepdale Podcast. Lovely to have your listening ears. It's April 2026, spring is here, and Easter is this weekend. This month we have a special episode recorded in the Holkham Forge with James Spedding, blacksmith and artisan. As this beautiful part of the world begins to wake up, first up we have a wildlife update from Ollie at the One Stop Nature Shop, and then we'll dive straight into the chat with James. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, then please do subscribe on your favourite podcast app or directory, which is free, and tell your family and friends. We'd also love your suggestions of interesting North Norfolk and West Norfolk folk we should be chatting with. Enjoy listening to this month's episode, and don't forget, there is an ever-growing back catalogue of episodes to listen to.
Skies all open wide, geese go high and over. Oh, now you're a beachcomber, a fistful of sandfire, sea, lavender, see you next year.
Hi everyone, it's Ollie from the One Stop Nature Shop, back here again to talk to you about the wildlife happenings on the North Norfolk coast. And as we rapidly approach the spring season, the weather has been fairly kind to us and has given us an indication of hopefully what will be a lovely spring coming up. So in terms of what to look out for in terms of nature on the Norfolk coast, we're going to be really focusing on the migratory bird species. So check out the reed beds, especially for birds like sedge warbler, hedgerows for birds such as common whitethroat, and also the sort of wetland areas for birds such as pied avocet and other waders that are moving up to their either English or Arctic breeding grounds. As the spring progresses and we move into April, the number of bird species will naturally increase. Obviously, we'll see some decrease as well in terms of the pink-footed geese, which are now long gone, as well as the white-fronted geese, which we've had good numbers of on the Norfolk coast this winter. So it really is a time of change, not only just for birds, but also for wider wildlife as well. Start to see the first butterflies emerging, obviously trees in blossom, and also might, if you're lucky, start to see the first reptiles and amphibians emerging. So obviously if you are visiting some coastal heathland areas along the coast, such as Barrow Common, up close to the shop, do keep your dogs on leash just in case European adder, Britain's only venomous snake, has started to emerge. So I think that's going to be it for this brief update. If you want to know the latest as to what has been seen recently bird-wise on the coast, you can pop into the shop at Dalegate Market. We're open every day 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We've got all the latest bird news, as well as latest binocular offerings, telescopes, spotting scopes, thermal imaging, trail cameras, and also we're just always happy to have a chat about what you may have seen on the coast. So thank you once again to Jason for having me on, and I'll give you another update when it comes around to summer.
So at the moment, James is just heating a rod of steel in, is it coke, the kind of the stuff?
This is anthracite actually, so really very high carbon content, solid fuel, which is great for what we do. Yeah, coke is less easily available now because we don't use coking coal to generate power in this country, and so there aren't great big coking plants, and therefore we rely on whole processing plants to create coke from other parts of the world, and the quality control is much more difficult. So the quality of the coke is less good, and the consequences for the quality of the fire is difficult to manage, and therefore we've gone to a different solid fuel that gives us the consistency that we want.
As you described it, crushed dinosaurs, which I think is a lovely way of putting it. It's brilliant. Well, I'm standing in Holkham Forge. This is in the Holkham estate, which many of our listeners will have visited. You can hear the fans in the background. James started his life as a blacksmith in Norfolk, although you had been blacksmithing before you sort of came to... you started at Deepdale in our little forge there, which was... Now I see the space was a tiny little space in comparison to where you are now, and just would never have allowed you to do some of the projects that you've done, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There is just it's so wonderfully traditional in many ways. You know, all of the different machines, all of the kind of horseshoes around your fireplace, the traditional fireplace. This has been a forge for hundreds of years at Holkham.
This part of Longlands was built by the estate in the 1850s. Right. So, and it was built as a forge, with the rest of Longlands as a kind of model farm type place. So there was a foundry and carpentry and blacksmithing and timber yard and threshing bar. I mean, everything that you'd need to be self-sufficient effectively. A couple of miles away from the hall, so keep all the dirty workers away from the pretty bits of the park. And so, yeah, it's amazing to be in a space which has been used by the estate until we moved in 2009 as a forge its whole life. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, 175 years or more now of consistent use as the same. So, yeah, it's unusual, I think. Not unique, but certainly unusual to be in a space which has had such a continuity of use.
The thing I love is the fact that they didn't... Holkham never skimped on the sort of beauty of the places they built. So although this was designed far enough away from the hall, so it sort of didn't disturb the hall dwellers, it's such a stunningly beautiful set of buildings, isn't it? Really, but the fact that they've built them beautifully and they are very practical as well, and there's still lots of different businesses working out of here, is absolutely just a testament to the forebears of Tom Cook, aren't they? They thought ahead in terms of what they were building.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that you could buy kind of plans from architects which kind of roughly sketch the shapes and sizes of the buildings, and then you supplied your own materials, and obviously they had previous experience of building beautifully in local clay and brick and all of the other trades that they required, and so they had a supply of craftspeople to be able to make them, and the ambition to be able to design something which is beautiful as well as functional. Yeah. And the fact that they're still being used there's been a few changes of use, but largely being used for the same purposes as they were designed is like I say, testament to the vision of the people who were making it at the time.
Yeah, they probably hadn't foreseen a big jewellery company being based in any of these buildings originally, but I'm sure they would have been very happy if that had been the case.
Exactly, nor next door, as part of the back room of the forge, and I'll go and show you in a minute, is a stone carver, an internationally famous figurative stone carver who's using part of what was the back room of the forge as a studio of stone carving. So, yeah, I mean, it's still being creatively used, but not necessarily... I mean, there were up to 8 people. The joy of occupying a building which has been such a long continuity of use is that you have people who were born and brought up and raised around here who come into the forge who know it from earlier in the 20th century, and so there are people in their 80s and 90s who pop in and tell us stories about what it was like all that time ago when they were kids, and they would come in and see. And there were 8 people in here. There was the pretty end, which is where the half still is, where there were 4 people who worked making decorative items, and at the other end of the forge there was another half which has now been removed, which was agricultural. So, and that's even separate from the farrier's shed, which is across the courtyard where they do their shoeing. So it was, there's still a steam engine, the remains of a stationary engine next door which powered all of the electrics and all of the belt-driven equipment and everything. And so, yeah, I love the fact that in living memory there are still those kind of echoes of the past which are available to us if we look.
For anybody who can't imagine this, I will take some photos and put them on our blog. But basically, it's a large shed, really, isn't it? It's but there's all the things you'd expect to find in a forge. Sort of racks of lots of steel, a huge array of fascinating tools, which all probably have a very specific purpose. From hammers to tongs to everything else. I'm sure they've all got some very fancy, wonderful names. And then there's a giant pair of gates that James is currently working on, just sitting, hanging from a unit in the middle of the room. There's all of the modern stuff that you can imagine, the sort of welding kit and the oxyacetylene and the drills and all that kind of thing. But it still has that real feel of tradition, and it's got great light in here as well, like really fabulous light, big open skylights, which is just wonderful. And it must have been. It must inspire you every time you come to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing building. It's built expressly for the purpose of not catching fire. So there's no wood in here apart from that holds the slate. So brick walls, steel rafters, cast iron steel kind of combination, very tiny slivers of wood to hold the nails of the slates on the roof. And so, I mean, there's probably a reason that it's still here, is because the people who designed it to make sure that it was really hard to set fire to, despite the fact that there's several fires in it almost constantly at the time. So yes, it's an amazing space, and we're very lucky that there's that they saw fit to add the skylights, presumably relatively recent additions in the life of the building, although they are kind of cast iron and kind of glazed construction. I guess it's a function of the fact that its use changed over time. So there's also a pit where that they installed in the sort of early part of the 20th century for maintaining the vehicles and things, the cars and limousines and all of that kind of thing. And so, although it was originally just heating up metal and bashing it, it's also that self-sufficiency thing of having mechanics and engineers on site who can make all of the things and keep everything running that needs to be maintained with all of the different complex vehicles that the estate have access to.
I love a working space that has a purpose, and when it's got history as well, there's something very, very special about it. It's fantastic. So how's your piece of metal coming on?
Yeah, no, it's definitely hot, so let's give it a bang and we'll see what it sounds like.
What's the piece of kit that you were just using?
A hammer, hand hammer, maybe 2 pounds roughly, a kilo sort of weight, and an anvil, which is, I don't know, what is that, like 300 pound anvil, so 150 kilos. So yeah, very traditional. Not a lot have changed in the world of blacksmithing in its fundamentals since the discovery of iron and its forging. Really, it's heat it up in some sort of fire to a warm enough temperature that you can change its shape by hitting it, and so that's basically what we do. It's at its core is very simple.
Yeah,
it's heat it up and then bash it with something. Obviously, that was a bit of hand hammering. I thought maybe we turn the power hammer on and you can hear the sort of different sort of sound. So obviously, relatively recent in the whatever it is, 2,500-3,000 years since iron's been smelted in Europe. We've added electric motors and pneumatic hammers and things like that, and that just allows us to kind of be creative with the steel without needing a strapping young thing who can wield the big hammers for day after day. So we can make the shapes and the forms that we want, but without quite so much damage to the joints. There is a lot of interest from young people. They love the creativity and the flexibility and the problem solving and all of the ingenuity that is associated with blacksmithing, but they could probably do without the hard slog of it.
So that's the electric hammer.
It's, well, you'd say it was pneumatic. It has a compressor in there, and so it uses air to lift and lower the ram. And the good thing about the pneumatic hammers is they have a foot controller which opens and closes a valve, and so actually it can be quite subtle. So I can be as delicate as I can, almost, with a hand hammer, but without the repetitive swinging and use of the muscles and all of that kind of thing. And obviously it allows me to forge much larger sections than it would be by hand, and much more quickly. And really our costs are time, and so anything that helps us make something more quickly helps the price be lower for people, makes it more affordable. A lot of what we do is organic forms, whether that's replicating old leaves and shapes that were made in heritage ironwork, or whether it's our own kind of designs, which are sort of you would say that they were organic and they were texture. We really love the fact that you can heat up a substance, and in normal room temperature it's as hard as nails, for example, and you can heat it up and you can deform it using heat and pressure, and that locks that mark is sort of frozen in time. Once it cools back down, then that is maintained for effectively ever in that particular piece. And so giving life, if you like, to something which is quite inanimate. It starts off as 6 metre long bar, which is made effectively in a giant pasta machine when they smelt it and roll it backwards and forwards into the different shapes that are available to buy kind of off the shelf. And actually giving life to that is what we do it for. That's our thing. I was pretty rubbish at making things at school, never really quite got it. It was the era of kind of plastics and cutting and sawing, so I'm a bit too young for it to have been kind of metalwork at school. It wasn't, it was folding plastic and drilling holes in it and things. It wasn't really my thing. But I was quite interested in wood turning, like bodging. I know that you have people who come to Deepdale and do courses, so that's exactly what I was doing in my backyard. I'd made a lathe, like a pole lathe in my backyard, and I wanted to make bowls, and the prices of the tools at the time were just fantastic, beyond my reach. And I saw someone demonstrating at a craft fair, and I was admiring his gouges to make the deep curves into the bowls, and I said, they look handmade, they don't look like shop bought. He said, no, I made them. I said, there's a local forge, there's a museum near me, and I go in there and I put the metal in and I bash it with a hammer, and it changes shape, and that's how I do it. And I said, wow, that's amazing. He said, well, it's really easy, you don't need much, you just need a heat source like a barbecue and a bit of copper pipe and a foot pump, and you'll blow enough oxygen into the bottom of the charcoal to be able to get it a bit of metal hot enough. And I was incredulous but curious, and so the next weekend I went home, I had a little barbecue and I put some charcoal in it, and I got a bit of copper pipe and a foot pump for blowing up air beds, and there you go. I had an old engine bolt or something, and I had a claw hammer and a I don't know what I hit it on, like a lump of metal, very, very lo-fi, and sure enough, you can get it orange hot in there if you pump hard enough and leave it in there long enough, and then you hit it with a hammer and it changes shape. And you've got, that first weekend I made a bowl turning gouge out of an old bit of recycled engine bolt, which was bizarrely the right sort of medium carbon steel to be able to hold an edge and all of that. So lots of serendipity, but that was it really. It's like, oh wow, that's actually quite interesting. I quite like that. And that was the end of my bowl turning, really. And so started off on a new path. Luckily there was someone locally who'd made a sort of backyard forge setup, and they were having kids and could do with realising a bit of money from the tools and setup that they had. It was just an old vacuum cleaner that you'd reversed the polarity so it was blowing instead of sucking, and it was very simple, maybe only a foot square little place that you could put charcoal or coke or whatever into, and suddenly the world's your oyster. And the box under the counter there was where his tools were in, so I bought, as well as the forge, there was a few sets of tongs and a few hammers and a few odds and bits and pieces that he'd made, but it was enough to kind of open the door really. And then that was it. Then it was to do with connection. Where I used to work, they happened to notice there was a gathering of blacksmiths somewhere locally that he went to, and said, oh, there seems to be an association of these people, and you can go and meet, and they'll seem helpful. And so that was it really. The next one was in Norfolk, and so just coincidentally that's how I found myself here.
I love serendipity things, just the way that these things happen and the way that you end up being and doing what you're going to do. The same as when we were opening the backpackers hostel. I remember I got back from travelling overseas and working overseas, and walked into the courtyard, which is now the stables, and Dad said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to build an extra extension to the barn here." And I went, "No, we're not. We're going to build a backpackers hostel." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, I didn't really know where that came from. It was one of those things, and and that's just the way that these things happen sometimes. What's the name of this bit of kit?
You'd say it was an induction heater or an induction forge. They are made generally in China, and they've been used in industry for a long time, lots in smelting and things, because basically it allows, through clever manipulation of alternating current, basically it's inducing, because iron is magnetic, to begin to warm it up, it basically uses the alternating current to flick the polarity of the magnetic coil sort of north and south, and that forces the atoms of iron to change their polarity. And so basically they rub against each other as they're forcing the polarity of the iron to change very quickly, like thousands of times a second. And so those atoms kind of being forced by the magnetic coil to change their polarity rubs them against each other, creates friction, and then at some other clever point it manages to induce a sort of short circuit in the steel to be able to get it right up to the sort of melting temperature. And I guess they've been miniaturized to make them more workshop accessible, and this is our first one that we bought, and it's based on, you can run it off a single phase supply, and you can heat up to kind of 20 mil solid bar in it. And it's fantastic for small localized heats, incredibly quick.
So if you need to put a sort of a bend sort of halfway down a thing, rather than having to lie the entire length into a fire, you can slide this through, get it in exactly the right place and heat up just that one little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you're punching a hole in something, or you're adding a particular piece of texture, or you want to swell the end of it, it allows you to be very concentrated. And the fire, traditional though it is, it probably takes 20 minutes or something to get up to, you've got chopped wood, make kindling, light a fire, wait for the wood to take in the solid fuel, and because it's such high carbon content, you need quite a lot of air for that and a lot of energy to get it going to become self-sustaining. And this is, you flick it on at the wall and suddenly it's hot in next to no time. So I'll get I'll turn it on and we'll put a bit of metal in it and see what you think. We've got a bit of 12 mil round there, and we're going to put it in the coil, and we're going to press there's foot controlled, you can have it timed, but you put foot controlled and you put it in.
Oh my God, that's bizarre.
And so that's the sound of iron being heated up in, I don't know,
milliseconds.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
and so
just bizarre.
That's 1200 degrees.
Wow.
13 now. It will keep going until it's actually melted.
That's surreal. That is just so weird. It's just like literally a sort of a copperish sort of style coil, and you can touch that, and it doesn't have any effect. It's not hot.
No, not at all, because it's just all it's doing. It's just copper pipe, and the gizmos inside control the frequency with which the current alternates, and therefore the polarity shifts. And inside of seconds, you've got something which took, 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes to warm up in the actual fire, and it's inside of 5 seconds you're doing what you want. So instead of it taking, so if you're prototyping something, you think, I wonder if that'll work. You don't have to spend half an hour going, actually it didn't work. You can just switch it on, and inside a couple of minutes you'd have figured out whether that's a good thing to do or not such a good thing to do. So yeah, it totally changes the mindset. You don't have to wait to do batches of things for it to be efficient. If you're using renewable energies to generate the electricity, then you're not, like I say, and it's only uses, although obviously it puts your electricity bill up, you're only using power when it's actually heating the steel. So you don't have to leave it on in the background.
No, and if you're heating something in seconds rather than hours, then you're using a fraction of the energy, aren't you? That's just That's amazing. That is just mind-boggling to watch, really. It's the sort of thing you need to put on YouTube. Like people just wouldn't believe that happened.
And the funny thing about it is when we got it, this is, I don't know, 8 years old or something, on our Facebook page, on YouTube, we did record us making a little acorn. And it's had, I don't know, the 2 processor videos, I think 4 million views. on they're 10, 20 seconds long of us putting a bit of metal in and heating it up and then putting it under the power hammer to make, using a top and bottom tool to kind of forge the shape of an acorn and then forge the tail out and wrap it around to make a little key fob. And, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah. No, that's just blown me away. So there we go.
And so we bought a bigger version of this, which can do, obviously you have to really quite closely match the material size. So it's not a silver bullet. The good thing about fire is you can do everything in a fire. You can't do everything in an induction heater, but the things that you can do in it are really good at it. And so it's about how you kind of tweak your setup with a bit more power. Gives you more flexibility to be able to do bigger sections so that it heats up more quickly, but also gives you a bit more flexibility in the range of different sizes that you can heat up at the same time. It's being used more by the kind of artist blacksmith community because, and the other thing, no fumes. Yeah. So you're not generating, you're not generating carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels, and you're not putting soot into the air. So yeah, it doesn't keep you very warm. That's the only problem.
No, yeah. Just to explain, this building has zero insulation. I can literally see the underneath of the tiles of the slates that are on the roof. So and the occasional gap. Not awful. I've seen worse. But there is literally no insulation. So in the old days when you had like 8 people working in here and 2 big fire pits, one at each end, then I can imagine it was pretty hot and steamy and grim. But I can imagine in the winter when you're using stuff, it must be pretty parky in here.
Yeah, it fairly regularly gets cold enough to freeze the water in the Bosch. so those are the days where you think, even if if you're standing,
maybe I'll stay at home and do some drawings.
Yeah, exactly. So like you say, the doors faced east, so. In the winter when we're getting northeasterlies and easterlies in here, absolutely freezing cold because, like you say, the wind blows up under the slate. Yeah. And there are vents in the top to obviously, if the wind's just a little bit strong enough, it snows in here.
Excellent.
So if the snow's sort of light and powdery, it'll blow up under the vents, and then there's photos in here of, I suppose, probably 2 inches of snow on the table in the middle of the forge. So
the good thing is that carbon monoxide poisoning is probably not going to be an issue because there's plenty of ventilation. However, a frostbite is a high possibility.
Yeah, exactly.
I really want to know a lot more about how you kind of ended up doing the work you did for Norwich Castle. So for anybody who hasn't seen it, you can now go and visit in person, and there's a great little programme on BBC or ITV?
Channel 4.
Channel 4, sorry, about the castle. This is Norwich Castle. It is one of the biggest medieval keeps left in Europe, and there has been a big project between Norwich Castle Museum and the British Museum. First time sort of outside of London that they've done something. And James here got the most incredible artisan contract of producing the most beautiful artwork, steel work on quite a few of the doors, didn't you? And other aspects of the building. Absolutely something to behold. You really need to go and see it in firsthand. But the TV program on Channel 4 is definitely worth watching. How did that come about? How did they find you, and how did you kind of realise it was something you wanted to do?
So the project started. It's got to be 8 years ago, probably. I got a phone call randomly from someone who's a carpenter and joiner saying we've been approached and there's a tender going out for the creation of a couple of sets of doors for Norwich Castle, and they'd like one of them to be a replica of their infirmary door, which is sort of 13th century, and could you have a look, how much do you think it might cost to make, basically, as part of the early stages. I thought, well, that's interesting. It had previously been hanging in the castle itself, but they'd taken it to Gresson Hall, and so we, for some reason, still not quite sure, we decided to ring up the museum service and say, please can we come and have a look at your infirmary door so that we can understand how it was made and so that we can provide an informed assessment of how long it might take to make if we were going to try and replicate it. And so we went to get hands-on with some this is in store in the Gresson Hall Museum, and so we went and we took photos and measurements and got really close up to it, because it's kind of tendrils and serpents, and it was a lot. It's not a simple. It's not a simple door, and so we gave a price for that, and they put it in, and the subcontractor who asked us to do it didn't get awarded the job, and so I thought, oh well, never mind. It would have been a nice idea. And it turns out that the company who did get the job, Coulson's in Cambridge, they didn't have a blacksmith really lined up. And so the original firm who asked us, happened to be doing a job for the architects and the thing, and they said, oh, you put in a price, but did you have a blacksmith in mind? Because they didn't know, now that it was moving forward, the designs had changed. Anyway, he put in a good word for us. And so Dr. Tim Pestel and Erin Davison from the architects, museum service and architects, came to the forge and said, would you be interested? And they brought some photos of what they wanted. It was different to the infirmary door copy. It was more informed by appropriate 12th century local examples. Yeah. And so that started off the project, really. Can you make something like that? Yes. So we much like we've just done now, we put the fire on, we got some metal hot, we bashed it about, said something like this, and they said, oh yes, a bit like that, but more delicate, more refined, whatever it was. And so we just started this backwards and forwards. Fortunately for us, there's a lady called, she's a professor now, Jane Geddes from Aberdeen, who who wrote the book on a medieval decorative ironwork in England. And she went round and surveyed all the existing ironwork in England and wrote it up in a book that was published in the late 20th century, including lots of examples of 12th century ironwork from in and around Norwich. So they had used her source material to design 3 different sort of hierarchies of doors, from the simple bits where the king probably wasn't, up to the really fancy pieces that you've seen on the Bygod Tower with the interlacing knotwork and the king's chamber door. And so it just started researching, what does 12th century metalwork look like? How is it finished? What do the latches look like? Because the doors, we might have ironwork on them, but the latches are new. What does archaeology show us? That led us down a rabbit hole of Dr. Ian Goodall's book, which is he's categorised all of the iron finds that have ever been dug out of archaeological sites across England. And so there are examples of what does a 9th century nail look like? What does a 13th century bucket handle look like? And so there are sketches. And so it started a conversation between me and Professor Geddes. I emailed her and said, this book that you've written is amazing, and we're using it to make some things for Norwich Castle. Would you be interested in hearing more about it? And she said, yeah, that'd be great, because I just look at old things. I'm really fascinated by the making of it and how you might go about reproducing 12th century ironwork in the 21st century. So she was incredibly generous with her time and her expertise. And whenever I had a problem, well, how does this handle work? How, would it be like this? Could I, is that, because we're driven by authenticity. It's got to look, not only has it got to look like how it should, but actually we're trying not to hide any modernity. We're trying to be as authentic as possible. So hinges, latches, fixings, the decorative elements, all of that is inspired and led by, Tim with his curatorial knowledge and archaeological insight, the architects, the fire specialists, how do the doors be designed to withstand fire, the carpentry, joinery, the project management, the archaeologists, the art historians all come together, work collaboratively, and you end up with something as beautiful as the keep.
It's a beautiful. I love the fact that they've taken this amazing medieval keep and put it back to the way it was at a certain stage during the medieval times, having been through the years of neglect, then as a prison, then as a Victorian museum, and the fact that it's sort of gone back to this stage. People maybe look at the doors for a sort of a minute or two when they go through and go, wow, isn't that lovely? And we specifically wanted to look at them because we knew you and we'd seen you on the TV program. We wanted to go and see what they looked like. But how long, did it take to go? Because there were quite a few different bits of the project that you did. But how long did you work on that project? Because it was a huge thing, wasn't it?
I guess probably on and off for a couple of years. So, we started off prototyping, small scale stuff. How's that going to work? Is it particularly focused in the early stages on the fire testing, because some of the doors had to withstand, they had to be 12th century looking, but they also had to withstand fire to protect escape routes and things like that, fire safety and all of that kind of stuff. And so, making a small scale version, setting fire to that, making a full size version, setting fire to
that must be pretty heartbreaking.
Well, no, it's amazing because that's what you need to do, because the doors are not made like that. Normally you get certified. Somebody makes one, they set fire to it, they can say yes. If we make it like this, then we'll make sure that it passes. But actually, these doors, they're 3 meters tall and 1.5 meters wide or something. So, and they're made entirely of oak. Instinctively you think, yeah, that'll be fine, but actually you've got to prove it to the fire officers and things to make sure that it's true. And so, yeah, I mean, all of the whole project right from the beginning has just been a voyage of discovery. So really, Professor Geddes was emphasising the multicoloured nature of it, like make sure the doors are painted, make sure the ironwork's bright, So we experimented, found someone who can do tinned ironwork, so it comes out silvery, which is an authentic 12th century finish for fancy ironwork that's mentioned in manuscripts. We were using cow horn to blacken. So rather than painting it black, because people think that iron is black, but really it's only been black since the early 20th century when cheap black paint was available. Before that, it was much more colourful. And before paint was widely used on ironwork, they were using cow horn. So in a manuscript, it says, get cow horn or feathers, heat up the metal and rub it on there, and that makes it black. And I thought, that seems unlikely. But, much like the guy who said, yeah, we'll just get it hot and heat it, in a forge and you can make your own tools. The manuscript says, heat it up and rub it on there. So I contacted a firm who make, sort of drinking goblets for Viking reenactors and things, big horn kind of tankards, and said, have you got any scraps that I could have? And they sent very kindly, for a couple of quid postage, they gave me a bag full of cow horn. And so we started heating it up and rubbing it on. And amazingly, the most beautiful, lustrous black surface. You melt the keratin onto the surface of the scale of the iron. It sucks it in, and it's not homogeneous and black and flat like paint. It has character and life and variation, and all of the hammer marks. Part of the job that we had was taking stock bar, which is a certain section dimension, and making it look like it's been forged out of bloomery iron. So every single surface of all of the iron has got hammer marks on it to make it look, authentic, because that's what it wanted to look like. That's what we were going for. And so we had authenticity in the finish. Luckily, Holkham have got lots of experience of linseed paint.
Yep.
And so we were using their linseed wax to seal it over the surface, which is another authentic 12th century sort of. They had linseed paint, so the blue, kind of ultramarine blue, was had lapis lazuli. Basically, in the 18th century, a French guy figured out that you can make fake lapis lazuli by baking a few different things in an oven, and it comes out chemically identical to lapis lazuli. And so strangely, I went down a rabbit hole of what is the pigment in this particular paint, and sure enough, it's this fake lapis lazuli. So you could say that the linseed paint, the blue of the door, is if they were using lapis as the pigment in that linseed paint, it's linseed oil and lapis lazuli together in a paint. So, you know, you could easily have seen that tinned silver finish on the iron and the lapis lazuli ultramarine blue on the door. That is something you could have seen. There's a lot of pushback, you know, from people who assume that medieval castles were drab and dull and things, but particularly important ones like Norwich, which were, you know, built for a king, which is where they took it back to, you know, on its opening in 1121 when it was built fit for a king. Okay, didn't visit very often, and it's pretty soon it got palmed off to someone else.
But they have a few places around
exactly,
the country. Yeah,
exactly. There is, you know, let's not get into second homers, but and so yeah, that's what I mean. And the beauty of the entire Keep project is that level of attention to detail is applied to the tapestries, to the fabrics, to the wooden bed and the thrones and the furniture and the wall hangings and the paintings, and that's why it's such a joy, because there's a whole team of people trying to kind of create something which isn't, you know, we're not saying it's a replica or that's exactly how it would have been, but all of the design choices and all of the aesthetic choices are informed by research, experimentation, previous examples.
Yeah, if you haven't been, you really need to go. There's the most incredible tapestry that runs around the Bayer tapestry of Norwich. Really, it's sort of and it's supposed to sort of follow on from the story of the Bayer tapestry, created by a huge number of amazing stitchers who came along and put this thing together. It's just amazing, and it goes all the way around. Yeah, all volunteer. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But the level of detail that goes into, as you say, that, you know, they found an amazing carpenter to create the beds and, you know, and all of that kind of thing. It's fabulous. And when you sit in the larger room and sit at the tables and watch the whole room being sort of lit up by projectors and explaining the sort of story of the castle, it's just it's such an incredible step forward from what it used to be. It's just absolutely amazing, and it must have been a project that was just a dream to be involved with as an artisan.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, your skills. Everyone was working towards a shared goal, and everyone respected each other's, you know, expertise, and so that kind of collaborative working. And, you know, going back to your mention of the British Museum, you know, the lower floor with the, you know, examples of pieces that have been found in Norfolk and from further afield in the, you know, their gallery of medieval life, just is the most exquisite exhibition space that I've seen. The lighting, the closeness that you can get to the you know, the artifacts, the explanation, the way that it really allows you to see that kind of period of history in a new light, which is kind of the aspiration. And they, you know, obviously people have, I mean, there's mixed reviews, isn't there? People liked it as a kind of taxidermy museum as it was, and it's always been like that. But
you can still see the stuffed animals if that's your thing. You can still see those.
They're showing their age a bit now. But yeah, I think generally. And there was another section on a Sky History programme called, to do with castles, saving castles. I mean, there's a 3-part series, and there was a 5-minute bit about Norwich Castle Keep in that, which I saw the other day. And so, yeah, it's a lovely exemplar. I mean, very fortunate to have had, you know, National Lottery funding to be able to see it through. Yeah. Because it was a long, you know, as you can see, you know, iFilms, who made the documentary, they're a local independent film production company, and it's a labour of love for them. They'd been filming for 7 years before it was picked up by anyone. So they had just thousands of hours of footage of all kinds of stuff. And they've just started releasing sort of short films on their YouTube channel, which have more of a deep dive behind the scenes of various bits. And so the first month was a bit more in the forge, because they came to the forge for 2 or 3 days filming at different parts of the process, which is included in the documentary and their short films. But I think the next film is about setting fire to the doors, the fire testing and hanging the doors and stuff. And then hopefully it will go on, because there's more, you know, obviously you only have 60 minutes or whatever it is, 80 minutes for the documentary, and there's so much more that they could go into. Yeah. And the joy of finding out all of that, going to the opening events and hearing the kind of expertise of the fabric specialists and the lengths they went to try and replicate, you know, authenticity there. It's inspiring.
Yeah, Absolutely.
And I'm glad that that's been communicated to the visitors. As well as the castle project, which has been running over the last few years, last year was the design, manufacture, installation of the LGBT plus Armed Forces Community Memorial at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. So between the late 60s and the late 90s, it was legal to be gay in society in the UK, but it was illegal to be gay and serve in the military. And so thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people were forced out or forced to quit their roles in the military by being accused, not necessarily being with much compelling evidence, but they were accused of being gay and forced out, some into homelessness, addiction, some really hideous stories of suffering. And the previous government commissioned a report into, what became called the gay ban, its effect, collecting testimonials from people who suffered, and basically attempting to plot a way forward towards reparations or acknowledgement of the damage. And one of the key recommendations, actually I think there were 3 out of the 40 or something they were in Lord Etherton's report, was to create a memorial at the National Memorial Arboretum to commemorate the suffering and also celebrate the contribution of LGBT plus armed forces serving personnel now. And so Nina next door, the stone carver, and a team, and Charlotte, the letterform designer, they approached us very early. Basically, it was an open competition, and they wanted to make something, but they didn't want it in stone, which is what their natural material. They wanted to do it in metal. And so we were brought in really to see if we could help. And almost all of the evidence used against the personnel was letters. So if obviously letters from loved ones were incredibly cherished, but it was a double-edged sword, because if the letter was found, then it could be your ticket out. You would be dismissed without your pension, with loss of privileges and sometimes incarceration and torture. And all kinds of stuff that goes along with it. And so the concept was to create, it's called the opened letter. And so basically we created it by scrunching up a piece of paper. And how does that look? Can we create something in metal? It ended up being bronze, which gives the impression of it being a piece of paper, but which is 2.5 metres tall, say. And so we entered the competition and submitted design sketches, were shortlisted from the 40 odd people who submitted down to 5. There was a presentation in London on HMS Wellington to a room full of top brass, and still mind-blowing they chose us as the team to deliver it. And so then we had to kind of work up maquettes, and I'm holding in my hand our presentation piece that we took to show what it might look like. And so we took words from the testimonies of the veterans and created a bespoke letter form which highlighted the strength and suffering endured by the veterans. And so the culmination of which was this LGBT plus Armed Forces Community Memorial being unveiled by the King last October, I think. Can't remember the date, but we were all there, and it was the first time a member of the royal family has publicly supported an LGBT charity, and he wanted to be there to be the person to kind of mark that event. And so, this is a really important piece of work that we've been doing over the last couple of years.
Stunning. It's absolutely beautiful.
The turnaround was crazy. Normally it takes 3 years to deliver a memorial to the Arboretum, and we had 9 months or something. It was intense and crazy. But as part of the process, we had veterans come to the forge and kind of leave their mark on the piece. It's in aluminium bronze, so we had to figure out, the best way to treat this material, because obviously we're used to using steel and maybe other types of bronze, but this aluminium bronze, which is also called naval bronze, seemed like the most fitting material to be used. And so, it was a very much a whole team effort. It's really touching, the effect on the veterans to see this piece of sculpture, which is created in their memory, and to celebrate them and to bear witness to their trials and to laud the progress made by the military and the contribution of the LGBT serving personnel. It's just the most beautiful kind of process to be involved in. Yeah. Obviously we make beautiful things for people, but this felt like a really important milestone really in the kind of journey for the country. I think it's one of the few LGBT serving personnel or veteran memorials in the world. There's various countries which are kind of trying to come to terms with that period of their past as well. And so, yes, it's quietly quite an important piece.
The projects that have come out of this forge are just wonderful. Norwich Castle and this LGBTQ plus memorial are just two stunning examples of the kind of work that you guys produce, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful. And I think anybody who has a piece of work by you guys anywhere in their vicinity will understand just how impactful a beautiful piece of work can be. And I just think it's truly wonderful. So keep up the amazing work, and thank you for being so passionate and just so artistic. It is wonderful, and I think the more artists that we can encourage to make Norfolk their home, the better the county is for it. So it's wonderful.
We're very lucky that we get asked to make lovely things by people, and really that's what it is. It's people taking the risk and the opportunity to kind of to push into that uncertainty of what could something look like. We're trying not to be restricted by what has gone before, and actually we can maybe try and explore new opportunities in the future.
Well, thank you so much, James. Just really lovely to finally manage to chat to you, because you've been so busy with the Norwich Castle project, and we just never quite got the timings right to kind of meet up. But it's just wonderful to see the projects here, I hope artisan works like this continue with aplomb, because they are just so inspiring in terms of the way that you create and you develop, and the more of this stuff that we can celebrate in Norfolk, the better, really, because I think Norfolk is all the better for having a huge range of artisans and producers that really produce unusual, interesting, fascinating stuff that's wonderful. So thank you so much for showing me around the forge, and thank you for coming on the podcast. And for anybody who's listening, we will put lots of links onto our blog about how to get hold of James and get him to be doing some amazing metal work for you, but also to some more links through to things like the Castle film and that sort of thing. So thank you so much, and I really hope that it's 2026 is a fantastic, fascinating year like the last ones.
It's certainly shaping up to be that. I mean, I have to say, it's not just me. There's definitely a team of people in here. It's you can see them on the footage of the documentary if you watch it. But going back to what you were saying about artists in general in North Norfolk, like for example, yesterday we were helping a ceramicist who had a problem with elements in her kiln. There is a definite sense of community, of the kind of creative community, and there's all kinds of amazing people doing amazing things in unexpected places in North Norfolk. And so whilst the kind of infrastructure might not be there, there's no lack of creativity, and it's just finding it really and making the most of it, celebrating.
Well, I know we've talked to quite a few artists on the podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to an awful lot more. And it is a really inspiring place to come and visit. It's just wonderful to see this sort of work happening. And how big is your team? How many people work from this forge over the weeks?
Well, there's the three of us, kind of the core, I suppose you'd say, and then interestingly, we've got someone who was an apprentice who started their journey with us 10 or 12 years ago, went off to set up their own business. We were really busy, and he had some really great kind of heritage forging skills, and we had a project where we could really use his help. Unfortunately, he had some time, and so actually we've got more people, and later in the year we're having someone who's studying blacksmithing at college coming for a period of time. They have to do a certain number of hours that they in industry as part of their course, and so also from Norfolk, not quite North, it's sort of, maybe you call it North Norfolk, more towards the Broads, but he's coming for a week or a couple of weeks. And we've got someone from Burnham Market who goes to school in Wells coming for their work experience for a week as well. So it varies. Sometimes it's just me, and other times, I mean, there's not 8 people, but other times it can get quite busy, which is lovely, to have that sort of flexibility and to be surrounded by people who are creative and all kind of working in the same direction to try and make beautiful things for people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, James. And we look forward to seeing future projects around the place. That'd be great. Cheers. Thanks again for listening to Jason's chat with James Spedding. As you got this far, we guess you enjoyed what you heard. So why not check out the back catalogue of episodes, which are available on any good podcast app or directory. Simply search Deepdale Podcast. Your suggestions, contributions, and your suggestions of people we should chat to can all be sent to podcast@deepdalepodcast.co.uk. We'll be back next month with more interesting conversations on the beautiful North Norfolk coast.
Skies all open wide, geese go high and over. Oh, now you're a beachcomber, a fistful of samphire sea, lavender, sea.